Hi, and welcome back to Lead with Bubba Scott. Today, I'm joined by retired Marine Captain Patrick Nugent, a former Citadel football player, a Wharton and Harvard grad, and former captain of Team USA at the Invictus Games. Patrick's story is as instructive as it is inspiring. After surviving a devastating gunshot wound during a live fire training exercise, Patrick had to rebuild his body, his identity, and his purpose. We discuss that journey and the grit framework he now uses to help others who face adversity. Let's get it. Patrick Nugent, welcome to Lead with Bubba Scott.
Thanks for having me, Bubba.
Patrick, we got a little bit of your intro at the beginning of this, so we're just going to dive right in. Before we talk about your long story and the moment that changed your life, can you take us back to the beginning? What was it like for you growing up, and what were you like as a kid?
Yeah, my journey began in the humble abode of Cleveland, Ohio, if you're familiar. So that's when I knew adversity from a young age, because growing up in Cleveland, we are subjected to be Cleveland Browns fans. But also growing up in Cleveland, I was just naturally drawn to playing sports. So growing up, played every sport you can think of: football, hockey, lacrosse, golf, basketball, you name it, I pretty much played it. And then in high school, I played football, hockey, lacrosse, and was really involved in sports. As I said, I went to a Catholic high school, and the motto was "Men for Others." And when it came time to decide where I wanted to go to college, in the back of my mind, I kind of knew I wanted the military route, because my grandfather served as a naval aviator, World War II. My dad served as a Marine just after Vietnam. And growing up, above our fireplace, we had a picture. It was my grandfather in his uniform, my dad in his uniform. There was a third photo, and it was blank. And me and my siblings, I have two older sisters, a younger brother, and out of our cousins, we're the youngest, and none of my cousins decided to serve. So I kept on looking at that photo, thinking that, it was going to come down to me. So when it came time in high school to decide what I wanted to pretty much do with my life, I knew I wanted to go to military school. But I didn't want to go to the Naval Academy, or I didn't want to go to West Point, because I wasn't sure what branch I wanted to serve in. So I had a conversation with my dad. I said, "Hey, do you know of any other educational institutions that, have a military type of school, but, you can kind of get exposure to the different branches?" And he said, "Yeah, I had a friend that went to the Citadel. Like, you can grab lunch with them next week." And after that conversation, it was pretty much set in stone that that was going to be the place that I was going to go to, because my junior year, I got to go down to Charleston, South Carolina, got to do an overnight visit. So you get paired up with a freshman, or knob as we like to call them. I think in the Naval Academy it's plebe. And you get to shadow them for a day. You get to see what it's like to live at the Citadel, what it's like to go to classes, what it's like to do the military training. And after, I pretty much told my dad when he picked me up, I was like, this is the place where I want to be. So I applied early decision, found out, I think it was like second week of high school, that I got accepted. So, when most of my peers and friends were applying to 15, 20 colleges, I only had applied to one college. So that's what brought me to the Citadel down in beautiful Charleston, South Carolina.
That's awesome, man. And anybody who knows about the Citadel knows that it's a pretty hardcore place. And you're saying knobs. It's just such an interesting slight difference. What's worse, being called a plebe or a knob? Hard to say, but everything I know about the Citadel indicates a tough place to go to school and a tough place to grow. So speaking of that toughness, I kind of want to peel back and take one step back. You talked about the myriad sports that you played growing up. Mm-hmm. You talked about, almost everything was in your wheelhouse. You wanted to play everything. I know you went on to continue with sport in school, but what really was it about the level of competition, the physicality of sports? Like what drew you to being open to all of those sports, and how did that influence you?
For me, I just loved being on a team, and a lot of my best friends were from football, hockey, lacrosse, and I chose all those different sports because of my teammates. Like when I was playing football, I hung out with my football teammates. When I was playing hockey, I was hanging out with the hockey teammates. Same thing with lacrosse. And at the school that I went to, most people played one sport. It was very out of the ordinary to play three sports, but I loved it. And a lot of the reason was the teammates. And then it did help. Like my team was really good. So for football, we won in 2008, we won the Ohio High School State Championship and ended up actually being
Oh, wow.
ranked #1 nationally, which was pretty cool. Like I had teammates that went on to play at Notre Dame, Michigan, Ohio State, and hockey. We went pretty far, almost made it to the Frozen Four, and then lacrosse did pretty well. So just being around the teammates for me was the biggest thing. And then yeah, talk about physicality. I chose football, hockey, lacrosse. All those sports demand physicality, and that was my competitive advantage, kind of like using a Marine Corps term, in the sports. So for football, I played linebacker. For hockey, I played left wing, but I was kind of like the bruiser of the team. I was the only football player that played hockey. So when they needed somebody to go into a corner, get a puck, that was me. And then lacrosse, same thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you went on to continue with athletics in college, right, at the Citadel?
Yeah, so I played football my knob year at the Citadel, and then at the end of my knob year, after spring ball, pretty much had a conversation with the coach. I said, "Hey, appreciate the opportunity, but I came to the Citadel to be the best prepared Marine Corps officer that I can be." And playing a college sport, I'm sure you saw it when you were at the Naval Academy. It's pretty much a full-time job, and the job I wanted was to be a Marine officer. It was not to play for the Cleveland Browns, despite my best efforts. So after my freshman year, pretty much had that conversation with the coach. I said, "Hey, coach, I really appreciate it, but I'm going to set my sights on the Marine Corps because I was getting out of a lot of stuff playing football. Like football took priority when, in actuality, I wanted the military to take priority."
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting. You played those kind of hard-nosed sports. You were drawn to a very hard-nosed environment at the Citadel, and then you were drawn to the Marine Corps, which of course exudes that same level of toughness. So that's definitely a theme for you. But is that something that was really at the top of your mind, like doing the hard thing, going after that which was tough?
Totally. I mean, I went into the Citadel with an open mind I pretty much narrowed it down between the Marine Corps and the Army because I knew I wanted infantry, again, for like the physicality, the toughness, the challenge. And it was early on in my Citadel career where they had, people from the Air Force, the Navy, the Army, the Marine Corps get up and, each of them had about 5 minutes to pretty much pitch us on why we should pursue a career in the Air Force and the Army and the Marines. And I remember every branch of service, the Navy was like, "Hey, come join the Navy, you'll sail the world." Army, they talked about all the different benefits you can receive. And then there was this gunnery sergeant that stood up and talked to us. And I think he may have spoken for 30 seconds max, but he said, "If you think you have what it takes to be a Marine, I want you to join me tomorrow at 5 a.m. We're going to run the endurance course." So just that sort of like challenge of like seeing if you have what it takes to be a Marine, and just the competitive nature, competitive aspects of just, earning the title to be called a Marine.
Yeah, that's I love to hear those stories about the different recruiting techniques of the different services. And the Marine Corps has a common theme there of, you're either good enough or you're not, otherwise we don't want you, which is always funny. So what is pretty cool is that, you stepped away from football because you were focused on becoming the best officer candidate, the best cadet. And I think
Yeah.
it's pretty fair to say that you were successful in doing that, considering you were were you the top ranked cadet, or was
I
that a
was, yeah.
brigade situation? Were you a leader in the cadre there?
Yeah, so for the Naval Academy listeners, it's the equivalent of being the brigade commander. So I was the regimental commander. So at the Citadel, we have one regiment, we have 5 battalions, and within each battalion, we have like roughly 4 companies. So senior year, I was fortunate enough, I got named and selected to be the regimental commander.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I can only imagine how difficult that must have been, being in charge of all that chicanery and wildness going on down there in South Kakalaki at the Citadel. But obviously a huge honor. And it I think translates pretty well in terms of, the uncomfortable peer leadership that you have to do in billets like that in college, which is such a benefit of going to one of those schools, whether it's, one of the academies or one of the great historic military programs down south as well.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons, like, that's, in my opinion, that's the hardest form of leadership, is the peer leadership. And and you get those reps when you're at the Naval Academy, when you're at the Citadel, when you're at West Point, because once you get out to the fleet in the Marine Corps, they're going to do what you say because you're the officer in charge and they pretty much have to. But obviously you want to be respected and so on and so forth. But, at the Citadel was really an opportunity to hone that leadership, because leading your peers is hard. Like, only 35% roughly of Citadel graduates go into the military. So not only do you have to lead, 65% of the people that don't want to pursue military. So that was a challenge as well.
That's crazy. That's something I didn't even think about at all. What a fascinating, interaction that must have been. But this is such a fascinating topic for me, peer leadership, because I think you hit it on the head. What a great environment to learn about that. It's really, depending on if you're reading a book or you're in a management class or you're just experiencing it firsthand, it's this idea of leading without actual authority, right? Like,
Totally.
and the military does a great job with this, whether it's at one of these schools or whether it's at officer candidate school or even at the basic school, where you are put in a billet where everyone next to you is the same rank. And in many cases, like the exact same day. So there's literally no seniority. And yet you have to lead this group of people, and it's all about influence and how are you going to actually navigate that? How do you have those tough conversations with people to hold people accountable when they are your buddies? Is there any insight that you have or advice that you have for folks who are in those peer leadership environments, in those billets, when they don't really have legitimate positional authority over people, but they are in a leadership role?
This might be basic for us, but number one thing I would recommend is leadership by example. I mean, you have to set the tone by your example. So you can't be telling somebody else to do something if you yourself can't do it, right? Like, one of the unwritten rules in like the infantry was for the physical fitness test, like, if you're an officer, like, you don't necessarily need to be number one, but you need to be in the top like 5% of your platoon, like, for all that stuff. And that's just basics of leading by example. And then with your peers, it's very similar, because your peers are going to respect you if they know that you're somebody that would be willing to roll up your sleeves as well. So you do that through actions, though, not by words. I mean, your words can back it up, but you need to be proven it through your actions first.
I completely agree. And there's just something that I learned in those scenarios, is that you actually kind of set conditions to be successful as a leader in a peer environment when you are not the leader. So I have always kind of had this insight that I felt like I was the only one who was seeing it this way, but it was really important to me that when you are in a followership position, when you are a follower, doing what is expected of you and what is asked of you, certainly, obviously, with caveats being, if you're asked to do something unethical or illegal, obviously you don't do it.
Yeah.
But by doing what is expected of you and what is asked of you and setting the example as a follower, you are then making that leader, that peer leader's job, much simpler. Totally. And that is its own way of leadership within the context of peer leadership. And then, like you just pointed out, when you flip that around, in a lot of cases, if you're in a leadership position like that, it will be rotational. So you will either step up or step down, and people will remember how you behaved when you were in the followership role too. And that credibility, that trust that you've built plays a huge role in helping things reciprocate.
Totally.
But yeah, so you ended up going to the Marine Corps, and your dream was to be an infantry officer, and you ended up succeeding. Can you talk about that experience?
Yeah, so I got very lucky. As we know, TBS, or the basic school in Quantico, like, not everybody gets their top choice. I was very, very fortunate. I got my top choice in infantry. And then I got to be stationed in Camp Pendleton, California, arguably one of the best duty stations that a Marine infantry officer can be. And I went to a unit with a long history. I went to 1st Battalion, 5th Marines. We're known as Geronimo, and our pretty much motto is make peace or die. So showing up to that unit, you have big shoes to fill. And I showed up. I was fortunate. I got to be a platoon commander right away. So 40 Marines and sailors checked into the battalion. And, we have 6 months before our first deployment, and we're going to be on the 31st MEU. For those that don't know, that's the Marine Expeditionary Unit. So really loved my job being a platoon commander because that is like what you just read about, what you hear about. It's everybody's favorite position of leadership because it's the truest form. You're at the tactical level, so you're actually the one implementing all the strategy and operations. And it's an opportunity for you to actually mold these, young 18-year-olds as well as learn from the 31, 32-year-olds that have had multiple combat deployments. And I was a sponge early on. I was fortunate. I had a platoon sergeant that, he had done 3 deployments and he was super willing to, take time out of his day to teach me the ropes, teach me how to lead, and teach me, what the Marines needed. And ended up doing that deployment. It was about 6-7 months, got back, got promoted to be first lieutenant, and got selected to be the company executive officer, which I didn't want to be. I wanted to be a cap platoon commander. I wanted to stay operational as long as I could, like most infantry officers. But, a lot of good came from being the company executive officer, even though I didn't want to be it, because for those that don't know, if you're the company executive officer, you're essentially just in charge of the planning and the operations of the company of 170 Marines, which is good. You learn a lot, but it's also very administrative in nature, and you don't really have as much influence over the Marines as you used to as being a platoon commander. So that part was difficult, just being a little bit further removed from the Marines, but really learned a lot, molded the lieutenants who were the platoon commanders, learned a lot from my company commander who came from the recon community. And we were slated to be 15th MU for this next deployment. And we had a 13-month workup. And we got very close as a unit because they had instituted this new policy where you needed to be in the field doing training 50% of the time before you deployed.
Wow.
So in like a month, you would have to be gone for 2 weeks out in the field doing training. And that was very difficult to pitch the Marines on, but we were able to do it, get through it, and it honestly made us better as a whole unit. And then 5 days into the deployment, ships would set sail from San Diego, and we would take a long journey to that area of operations. And we were going to stop in Hawaii to refuel the ships. So my company commander was like, let's just get the Marines. Let's go to Hawaii. Let's do a week-long live fire training so that the Marines don't have to, just sit on ship and sleep the whole time. So I was like, all right, as the XO, you're in charge of making that happen. So I made that happen, and we were in Hawaii. We started off with fire team attacks, squad attacks, and then we were going to culminate with platoon live fire attacks on the final day. And we had done day runs. We were on the big island of Hawaii. We're on this training exercise. It essentially looks like you're on the planet Mars. There's just volcanic rock everywhere. It smelled like all the ammunition and explosives that we were using earlier in the day. And we were getting started for the night attacks. And I was with the maneuver element, part of the safety structure for the event. And the support by fire element was firing on the objective. The maneuver element, we were going towards the objective. The 2 Marines ahead of me, there was this trench system. They hopped in the trench system, and I was looking where I was going to put my hand to hop in the trench. And then the next thing I know, I feel this loud pop. And the next thing I know, my body jerked forward. My face just crushes this piece of volcanic rock, and I'm paralyzed from the waist down. And internally, I'm freaking out. I'm like, what the heck just happened? I have no idea. So I get on the radio. I'm like, hey, doc, I can't move my lower body. Something happened. So next thing I know, I hear this doc sprinting over. He assesses my wounds, and he's like, hey, sir, you got shot. I was like, what?
What?
He's like, you got shot. I was like, well, how bad is it? He's like, well, I can't find an exit wound. And if you get shot, you want the bullet to go in and out. And I knew where it hit me, like I couldn't feel my legs. So it had to be causing some sort of internal damage. And as soon as he said that, that's when like the pain just started to hit. And the only way I can describe it is just imagine like somebody has a blowtorch on your entire lower body, just like unrelenting.
Wow.
And like being one of the leaders on the ground, right? Like being the XO, for the listeners not familiar with the military, a company of 170 Marines, there's like 6 officers. So like you're pretty much trained to be cool, calm, collected in these like highly stressful situations. And, but my first reaction, I wanted to scream, yell, cry, like do all that stuff. Cause like that pain was so bad, but I also knew the golden hour, like it was drilled into us. Like we needed to like get a helicopter inbound to like come get me, take me to that next level of care. And the next thing I know, I hear my Marines on the radio and they're like, "Hey sir, helicopter's going to be here in 15 minutes. Like sit tight." And it was like the longest 15 minutes of my life. Fortunately for me, I had like a lot of different Marines come over, talk to me, get my mind off the pain and everything like that. And helicopter comes. I get loaded on the helicopter and I'm away from my Marines now. One of the corpsmen joins and I grab the doc on the helicopter. I was like, "Doc, you got to give me something for this pain. Like it is unbearable." And the next thing I know, I feel this shot in my arm. And I'm like, "Whoa, what was that?" He's like, "I just gave you some fentanyl. Like you should feel it instantaneously."
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And like 10 seconds goes by nothing. 30 seconds goes by nothing. I'm like, "Doc, this isn't doing anything for the pain. Like, you got to give me another one of those shots." And he's like, "That's all I'm authorized to give you." And it was at that point where, I'm in the back of this helicopter. It's cold. It's dark. It's noisy. I'm like, okay, if fentanyl's not strong enough, like, I have to be stronger. And I kept on, like, just telling myself to find a way to stay awake, find a way to stay conscious, and find a way to, like, keep breathing. Because in my mind, I thought if I closed my eyes, if I went unconscious, my body would essentially give up. And, this is not the way that I wanted to go out. So I'm in the helicopter about 15, 20 minutes, get to the next level of medical care. And the next thing I know, I end up waking up 5, 6 days later. I've got a feeding tube down my throat, more wires in me than I've ever seen before, and blurry vision. I can only make out like objects, not faces or anything like that. I'm on ketamine. I'm on all this different like hardcore medicine. I'm in and out of consciousness like the first few days. And, once I come to and realize that, I'm not dreaming, like this is reality, I have to learn my prognosis. And, my parents had flown out from Cleveland. So they got a call. This happened July 12th, 2017. So I think it was like a Friday. So my dad got a call at work on a Friday, like, "Hey, your son's been shot. He's in surgery. Like, we're going to get you on the next flight to Hawaii because we don't know how bad it is." So my mom and my dad, the next day on a Saturday, they have to board a flight to Hawaii when most people are going for their honeymoon, for a wedding, for like family vacation. They're going to see if their son's going to survive. And I remember they had to be the ones to tell me like what the prognosis was. And the prognosis was never going to walk again, never going to go to the bathroom independently. That's number one or number two. And never have children.
Wow.
And I was 26 years old at the time. I didn't believe it at first. I thought they were joking. I still thought I was dreaming. And it wasn't until I got on like lesser medication to where like reality actually did set in for me. And then, so I ended up being at the ICU. And so I got life flighted. So this happened on the big island of Hawaii. I got life flighted to Tripler. Tripler's on the island of Oahu. So I woke up in Oahu and ended up spending about 6 weeks at that ICU. I don't even remember like my doctor's faces, my nurse's faces, just because like all the medication that I was on. And they determine after the 6 weeks, hey, based on the extent of your injuries, like the next best place to send you is Walter Reed. And as you know, Walter Reed's like the military's top hospital. The president gets treated there. Like all the severely wounded from the military get treated there. And if you go to Walter Reed, like your situation is pretty dire, which mine was. And I get sent to Walter Reed. And it's at Walter Reed where the journey like truly began. Because in Hawaii, I couldn't really do anything. I was in the ICU. I was just in and out of surgeries. I was just essentially surviving at Tripler. And then I get to Walter Reed and I'm like, I'm just itching to start, physical therapy, start doing something, start to try to prove the doctors wrong. Because in my mind, yes, the injury's bad, the prognosis is horrible, but there's plenty of people that have underwent worse. And, I still wanted to continue on my Marine Corps career. Like this, for me, was just going to be a speed bump, a very big speed bump, but it was just going to be a speed bump. And, time would tell if and when my service would change and so on and so forth.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. So I want to, focus on, as you were talking about your path growing up, your commitment to sports, that physicality. I mean, you made it through the infantry officer's course. You're an infantry officer. You're this jocular physical leader, and you had this injury, and kind of we're paused here. We are right at Walter Reed before you're able to begin this recovery. What is your mindset? What are you thinking about? And how did you get to a point where you could say what you just passed, which was, this is a speed bump. I'm going to, immediately start work as soon as possible. Can you talk us through how you got to that mindset?
Sure. So for context, bullet fractured my left pelvis. It ripped through my small and large intestine, and it lodged in my right hip. So the main injury that I was dealing with once I got to Walter Reed was I had a severed right sciatic nerve. And I didn't know what the hell a sciatic nerve was, but it's the biggest nerve in your lower body. It innervates your glutes, your calf, your hamstring, your foot, like all the pretty much major muscles except for the quad. And I also had an ostomy, so that's where I was going number 2. And despite all this, I am a Marine after all. So my mindset at that time was, yes, this is bad, but if I could prove the doctors wrong, then I could rejoin my Marines, because that was the biggest thing. Like they were about to start the deployment, and I'm an optimist. I have a lot of hope, and that was driving me early on because I was the XL. I'd been with these Marines the last 13 months, and here I was literally, 5 days into the deployment, and I'm literally taken out of the fight, and I'm back stateside, and they still have 7-8 months that they're going to be downrange deployed. So that was a big motivator for me because I wanted to get back to them.
Let's talk a little bit about that road to recovery. You're at Walter Reed. You've come to the determination that your Marines need you, and you're going to do whatever it takes to get back to them. What did that process look like?
It was long, it was arduous, it was continuous. So when I say I was at Walter Reed, I was living at Walter Reed. I was inpatient at a hospital. Fortunately for me, I had my own hospital room. Big screen TV, the works, but it was just very routine, very monotonous, and it was very slow at first. And I'm somebody that's wired. I need to see progress, because if I see progress, then that begins momentum. And if I see momentum, like, watch out. So for the first thing, right, the prognosis is never going to walk, never going to go to the bathroom, and, never have children. I'm like, which one of those 3 can I attack first? And for me, it was the second one. It was the ability to go to the bathroom under my own power. And I had a conversation with my doc. It had been like 3 or 4 months. I said, hey, listen, I want to see if I can go to the bathroom on my own. What do I have to do? And the doctor essentially tells me what I have to do. And I don't have to go into too much detail, but essentially I had to start self-cathing because my mind-body connection was broken. So I had a catheter in for these last 4 months. So my body was just used to, peeing a certain way. So, but once they took that catheter out, like I would feel that urge to have to go to the bathroom, but I wouldn't be able to physically do it. So, she told me you're going to have to self-cath and retrain yourself. And, spare your listeners the graphic details, but I had to do that for 6 weeks. And just think, every time you have to go to the bathroom, had to sit on the foot of my hospital bed, self-cath, record how much I was able to do, so on and so forth.
Wow.
But again, like what allowed me to keep showing up and keep enduring like that pain was, if I can prove the doctor's wrong, I can get back to my Marines. So like having that strong why behind it. And that was the first win of my recovery. And it didn't happen until like month 4. And then once that happened, it was okay, how can I start making progress towards walking? Because at this point, I had still been in a wheelchair because all the internal damage I had from the injury and all the different surgery I was having on my right leg. And I essentially had to get my right quad strong enough because that was the only muscle that worked. And they wanted to give me this device called the IDEA, which is the Intrepid Dynamic Exoskeletal Orthosis, which is a mouthful. So that's why they say the IDEA. Essentially, it's a prosthetic for individuals that still have their limbs. So it goes over the limb, looks like a prosthetic, but, I have my limb. And, a fun fact, it was invented by the military because, during the height of the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, a lot of service members were choosing elective amputation because they see their friends, their peers with these prosthetics running, jumping, sprinting. But the people that had the limbs, but the limbs weren't functioning, like they had like these plastic like braces that didn't really do anything. Like, yes, they could walk, but like in the military, you need to be able to shoot, move, communicate at a high level. So the military is like, okay, we can't have these service members keep chopping off their limbs. So let's see if we can create a device. And lo and behold, that's where the idea came about. So that was my strong why to learn how to walk, because if I get my quad strong enough, if I can get that idea, then I'm one step closer to like walking, running, jumping, and getting back into the fight. So I remember the first day of physical therapy, like once I was cleared, the physical therapist is like, all right, get on the exercise bike. I'm sure you've been on an exercise bike before. So I'm like, all right, how long you want me on here for? She's like, 10 minutes to warm up. I'm like, okay. I'm pedaling. Nothing's turning on. So I check to make sure it's plugged in. It's plugged in. I tapped my physical therapist. I said, hey, I think this one's broken. Like, should I go on a different one? She's like, this is not broken. You're just not strong enough to turn it on. I was like, what?
Wow.
Like, doesn't take that much to turn on an exercise bike, but I was so weak at this time because I've been just bedridden for 4 months, like getting around in a wheelchair, like didn't really use my lower body. And, that could have been humiliating, which it was, but it also instilled in me, okay, like I can't sandbag this recovery because I am nowhere near where I want to be. So I have to continue to like put in the work, show up every day and put in extra work because I'm behind right now. And, the only way to speed that up from my perspective was to put in more work. So lo and behold, like a week later, I was able to turn on the machine, keep progressing, and, go from wheelchair to walker to crutches to crutch to cane to eventually walking. But that was like, close to a year before I was able to walk again for that.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you had that first small win 4 months in at Walter Reed.
Yeah.
Where you're able to go to the bathroom, and then a year later, you're finally able to walk. And
without an assistive device, yeah.
Yeah. I can't even imagine going from that level of injury where you can't even start the bike all the way to not only starting and powering the bike, but being able to walk again after not having been able to do so. I mean, that is an incredible journey. I would just be really interested in where your headspace was as you're looking at this thing, because it is such a long road to recovery. And I don't think that most people have had an experience where it would be such a long path towards achieving that. How did you navigate that?
So I was in Walter Reed. I was in the physical therapy space. I was talking to somebody that had been there for like a few months. And I told them, I was like, oh yeah, I'll be up and walking in like 2 months. And they're like, you're not going to be walking until like next year.
Wow.
And I was like, what? It's going to take, I was in disbelief. I thought it was going to take, so much quicker, so much sooner. And, once he said like next year, I'm like, that is so long. Like, how do I stay motivated for like that long of a time? And one of the ways that I did it was, I'm a huge proponent of the quote, you can't manage what you don't measure. So I needed a way to measure my progress. And for me, I'm living at Walter Reed. I'm bored out of my mind. I've watched a lot of Netflix, watched a lot of Stranger Things, watched a lot of sports. I mean, caveat, I got injured at the right time because I got Walter Reed in like August, so like right when football season started. So if you get injured, you want to get injured during football season, so you have at least stuff to watch. But outside of that, after dinner every night, I was like, everybody at physical therapy, occupational therapy, they go home and stuff like that. So essentially just you at the hospital. So they had this indoor gym that had a track, and I would go there with my walker or whatever stage I was at the time, whether it was walker, crutches, and I would time myself walking 1 mile. And the first time I did it, I remember clear as day. It was, cold, rainy out. So luckily I was inside, and my dad's sitting in this chair, watching me reading a book. And I finished the mile with the walker, and I'm drenched in sweat. My heart's beating. And I asked him, I was like, what's the time? And he's like, 48 minutes. I was like, what?
Wow. Yeah.
And as you know, right, walking, it should take 15, 20 minutes. But I was so slow. And again, similar to like the exercise bike, 48 minutes is, I'm nowhere near passing a PFT. So I need, that kind of woke me up to the fact of, again, I'm nowhere near where I want to be, but I need a way to measure where I'm at and where I'm going. And for me, it was through that mile. And every day after dinner, I'd go to that track, I'd time myself, I'd do a mile. And sometimes it would be 5 seconds faster. Sometimes it would be 10 seconds faster. But it was always slightly faster. So that helped me stay motivated because I can actually see that progress. Because there were plenty of times where it'd be 5, 6 months in, they're like, oh, you're due for another surgery. And maybe at this time I was in crutches. And then after the surgery, now I'm back to a wheelchair for 2 weeks. And then I have to restart the process all over again. But what kept me motivated was I was actually seeing the progress and I had data behind it. And, that's essentially something I try to keep in this new part of life as well.
Dude, that is so helpful and so awesome because, obviously you just have like an unbelievable tenacious spirit, which is incredibly laudable. But I think even with that incredible spirit, it could be not daunting in the sense that, like, for certain people, I would imagine like you, since you were, just so motivated to get after it. But even if you have this incredible motivation, not knowing how to move the ball forward would be so challenging. And like having the right care, right? Having a team around you, obviously those things help. But it is such a great piece of advice that, taking that small step to actually measure your progress and measure your success, that is hugely helpful. And just to go back to that vignette you painted, I can't imagine how many people, would have given up before, 48 minutes. That's a long time, but also that's like a 48 minutes of fight, and I think that's kind of maybe the most impressive of all the miles that you ended up taking is that first one, because I can't imagine how challenging that must have been. And so what an incredible part of the story. And I want to continue that evolution because we talked so much about your love of physicality, your love of sport, your work ethic, that drive, that motivation. And then if we follow your story, upon recovery, you end up finding sport again. And can you tell us about that and where that ended up taking you?
Yeah. So it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. After I was, able to start walking again, I had this doctor came. He was one of my plastic surgeons, and he's a specialist in nerve surgery, and he wanted to perform this experimental surgery on me. He's like, hey, you're young, you're healthy, you're making a lot of progress. This surgery's been done once before. It was successful. It was at the Mayo Clinic, but I think we have a good shot with you. Obviously, I'm going to say yes because my injury couldn't get much worse. And what he wanted to do, he wanted to go in, reconnect my nerve where it was severed and have it regenerate on its own. So it would essentially lead to a full recovery.
Oh, wow.
So I was stoked. So I was like, when can we do this? He's like, a couple weeks. I was like, all right. Surgery scheduled for a Monday. And the doctor had been practicing on this cadaver all weekend. By the way, the doctor, he went to Harvard Medical School. Everybody at the, Walter Reed loved him. He was like the top doctor. It's supposed to be this 12-hour surgery. So I get wheeled in, get wheeled out. And this was surgery number 15 for me. And I learned a lot from surgeries because you need something to look forward to. So for me, it was comfort food. So I would always have Chick-fil-A waiting for me. Like my parents would give me Chick-fil-A and they'd bring it to the waiting room. So I'm there eating Chick-fil-A, waiting for the doctor to come in, tell me how the surgery went. And he comes, he sits at the, foot of my bed and he's like, "Hey, I'm going to shoot it to you straight. The surgery is unsuccessful." And, my jaw dropped when he said that. I was like, "Unsuccessful? Like surgeries are supposed to be successful. Like, what do you mean?" And then he goes on to explain, he's like, "We opened you up. The bullet severed too close to your spinal column. We didn't want to risk like permanently paralyzing you.
Oh, wow.
So
Yeah.
we essentially had to sew you back up, and we'll be back next week to kind of talk about the game plan moving forward." And that's pretty much where all hope for me pretty much just plummeted. And it really came to fruition later that night. My Marines were still on the deployment. They called me about once a week to check in, see how things were. And, I was dreading this upcoming phone call because I knew what they were going to ask. They were going to ask how the surgery go and like, when am I coming back? So when I got the phone call, I had to tell them, I'm like, "Hey, surgery is unsuccessful. I'm not coming back." And as soon as I said those words, like I immediately started crying my eyes out. And, I never cried in the Marines, never cried at the Citadel, never cried. I couldn't even tell you the last time I cried. And I cried for a good like 15 minutes. And when I hung up, I was like, why was I like crying so much? And after like reflecting, I came to learn that it was, my body's way of telling me like all this hope that I had built up to, to stay in the Marine Corps, to continue on, it was gone. My life, my career, my physical body, like I had hoped that I could, get a full recovery, and now like that's no longer in the cards. And that's pretty much when I knew that I was going to be medically retired from the Marines, because I could no longer shoot, move, and communicate at a high level. And without getting too far winded, like they instituted this new policy, and I was going to be put on a medical board, so I knew my time was limited. So suffice it to say, like that's where I was in physical therapy for like a few weeks, like looking down, looking depressed, and my physical therapist pretty much called me out. She was like, "What's going on?" I was like, "Well, I'm on a medical board. Like I wanted to stay in the Marine Corps for 20 years, and now I'm gonna have to figure out what to do with my life," and kind of lost. Like when I was in physical therapy before, it was, to learn how to walk, and then physicality before that was to get ready for a deployment, and then before that it was sports, and like my training like no longer had a purpose. And she was like, "Well, what if you try to make the Invictus Games team?" I was like, "What is that?" Because I had no idea what Invictus was at the time. And then she went to tell me what the Invictus Games were. And, for those that don't know, think of Paralympics, but it's for wounded service members. They have rowing, track, field, powerlifting, swimming, like pretty much all like the Paralympic sports. Started by Prince Harry out of the UK. It's like every 2 years. But she told me that, and I was like, I don't know. I just started learning how to walk again. I can barely like lift heavy weight. But what I learned is you don't challenge a Marine, and she challenged me. And from then on, I pretty much took it as that. I wanted to see if I had what it took to, earn a slot on the team, because I thought if I was able to earn a slot on the team, then my recovery will have far exceeded my own expectations. So that was another big, strong why for what kept me in the fight after I knew I was going to be medically retired. I turned to sport again because, sport had been a big part of my life growing up. So why not, after recovery and after my time in the Marine Corps?
To give you that level of, empathy and that challenge to like, what an incredible therapist or doctor or,
Yeah, no, she was
what
great.
a special person to identify, that you had this spirit in you that was still there, and to be able to tap into it. And like, yeah, turning back to sport, turning back to a team, turning back to physicality, you went on to get a bronze medal in powerlifting. And I mean, ultimately, which I think I can't even imagine, like what an incredible honor, you were named captain of Team USA for the Invictus Games. Looking back at where you started at the bottom of that mountain at Walter Reed, couldn't go to the bathroom, never would walk again. to being chosen as the captain of the of Team USA Invictus Games team? What did that mean to you?
It meant the world, man. It meant that my, hard work, perseverance, grit, like leadership, like I still had it and I could still use it. It just had to be in a different capacity. Like it no longer would be in a military uniform, but now it could be in an athletic uniform, still representing the country, but in a different way. So I competed in Dusseldorf, Germany. So global adaptive sports competition. And being team captain, I just wanted to make the team. And like once I made the team, I didn't know if I was going to be selected for captain, but then I get selected for captain. And it's just a full circle moment because just reinstilled in me the belief that I could still lead and I could still be of value to not only, the military community, but also other people as well.
Absolutely. And I mean, getting selected for captain in that group of people, I mean, what an unbelievable group of American patriots and patriots for all their nations who participate in the Invictus Games. I mean, to be in a group of people who have all been on this path to recovery and who've all worked so hard and who have all come so far. What an incredible honor and achievement that you were selected for that. And I know for a fact we could continue talking about everything you learned at the Invictus Games, the countless people whom you befriended and your great teammates. But I do want to turn a little bit to this framework that you've created, because we've been fortunate enough to follow your journey thus far and learn about your path to recovery and learn about what it meant to you to be a Marine and to lose that and to be able to come back and fight and get all the way back to being captain of Team USA. And I want to talk about your template, GRIT. Can you explain that to us?
Yeah, so GRIT was first, I first thought about it when I finished the Invictus Games and I had a month off before I was going to start my professional journey in New York. So when most Marines have a month off, they climb a big mountain. So I decided to buy a ticket, go to Tanzania, and climb Mount Kilimanjaro. Just me and my guide. And you have a lot of time to yourself to think because there's no service, there's no anything. And I summited in December 2023. So it had been 6 years since my injury. And when I was reflecting on the descent of Mount Kilimanjaro, I wanted to figure out like how I was able to bounce back so quickly through what I call now like my life's biggest crucible moment, and how not only I had crucible moments throughout my life outside of the gunshot wound, but also everybody else in life has crucible moments. And I define a crucible moment as moments that we experience in life that not only test us, but they test our response to them as well. And I was thinking, I was like, well, how was I prepared for this crucible moment? And then that led to the first part of the framework, G, which is growing your grit. And I had the good fortune, which I don't know, you still might, but Angela Duckworth, she teaches at Wharton, and she wrote an entire book on grit. And she defines it as passion and perseverance to achieve long-term goals. And the beauty of it is that it's trainable, like any skill out there, but you have to train it through deliberate discomfort. And, everybody's born with a certain level. And it's so prevalent to me because I remember the first time I went to the Citadel or Marine Corps training, like my definition of hard is like nowhere near what my definition of hard is now. But I needed to experience those trials and tribulations and grow my grit to get it to a certain level to where, I got shot at 26. If I got shot at 21 or 18, I don't know if I would have bounced back as well. But it had been because of all those times that I had, grown my grit to, I got my grit to like a level to where, the biggest crucible moment in my life happened and I was able to bounce back quickly because of it. So then I kind of share also in that it's holistically, it's physical, it's mental, it's emotional, and you have to train all three. Physical is what most people default to, right? It's did you climb Mount Kilimanjaro? Did you run a marathon? But the mental and the emotional aspect are just as important. I mean, emotional aspect, that's what I had to deal with a lot at Walter Reed. It's knowing that you don't know. And if you don't know, you need to ask for help. And it took me the longest time at Walter Reed to ask for help, to tap into the emotional side, because I thought if I asked for help, at least early on, that they would use it to ding me and not be allowed to continue to serve in the Marine Corps. So when I talk about growing grit, I talk about it in like the holistic fashion, and it's important because through Angela's research, she found that it was the #1 predictor of long-term success. And I mean, everybody listening wants to be successful. Well, grit's your way to be successful, but you have to train it, and you have to train it consistently and holistically, because not everybody's, born a 10 out of 10, but through your life experience, you can increase that number, but you only increase that number through doing those hard and difficult things. So that's what I talk about when, this is how you prepare yourself for that crucible moment. And then the R comes in. The R is regulating your response. And this happens in 2 phases. The first phase, it happens like when that crucible moment happens, so like in the moment, and then after the moment. When I had, time at the Citadel to learn and read and study, I read this book called On Combat by Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman. And the thing that I remember was when he talks about essentially your body gets to fight or flight when it, is in these different forms of crucible moment. And the quickest way to respond that's within your control is to control your body's state. And that's through, he talks about tactical breathing. So I didn't talk about it in the story, but like that's something that I did right after I got shot to try to remain as calm as I could in front of my Marines, because nobody's like paying attention to like how you're breathing. But it's essentially box breathing. It's you breathe in through your nose, you hold, you breathe out, and you hold for 4 seconds at a time. And that controls your body's state right away in that fight or flight. And then the second thing that, you focus on in the moment, once you control your body's state, is you focus your body's attention. And you need to give your body attention for, what is the next controllable step you can actually take. So we're like really zooming in on that next step. Like me in the helicopter was just focusing on the breathing. And, focusing my attention to there, like not thinking about anything else, like just being really present in the moment and focusing on like what was within my control. And then the last part of in the moment is when you give your body some direction. Your body's looking for direction. And the way that I found most effective, and the research backs this up, is like having a word, a phrase, a mantra that you repeat to give you that strength in those difficult times, in those moments. And for me, the phrase that I always came back to was find a way. And I learned about that phrase early on in my Marine Corps career because, as officers and Marines, right, you're given a mission, you're given an order. It's on you to find a way to accomplish it, right? Like you're not going to come back and be like, hey, I tried my best. It's like, no, you're going to find a way to accomplish it as long as it's not immoral or unethical. So I really took that phrase to heart. And whenever I was in a difficult moment in the military, and even today, I always repeat find a way, because to me, that gives me the belief that there is a way. I just have to find it. So that's in the moment, right? You control your body's state through breathing, attention through focusing on the next controllable step. So think like the next 5 minutes, not the next 5 years. And then giving your body that sense of direction through having that word, that phrase, that mantra. So once you control in the moment, the next is after the moment. Could be a day, could be a week, a month, a year. This is where I learned about the power of cognitive reappraisal. So it was in therapy when I was at Walter Reed. It was right when I got put on a medical board. I get wheeled in. This was like the 6th therapist that I had met. And, I told her, I was like, listen, I'm on a medical board. Like my life's over. Like I've been training essentially my entire life for this career path. And now it's no longer viable. And I have no idea what to do. Like pretty much like a woe is me. And she challenged me. And again, like you don't challenge a Marine. But first she described what cognitive reappraisal means, because like that's a fancy term. I wasn't a psychology major, I was a business major. And essentially what it is, it's like you're reframing the narrative that you're telling yourself about these crucible moments. So with the gunshot wound, the narrative that I had constructed after I found out that I was going to be on a medical board, like this was the worst thing that could ever happen to me. And then, I thought it was a bunch of woo-woo at first when she's like, what if you rephrase it, reframe it that it's actually the best thing that could ever happen to you? And I didn't want to believe it at first, but I was out of options, right? So I'm like, okay, well, let me at least try it out and see what happens. Um, but once that happens, is I needed to give myself belief that that narrative was actually working, and I needed credibility and believability, which led to me going to grad school and the Invictus Games and so on and so forth. Of like me being on this pursuit of finding out why my biggest crucible moment, the gunshot wound, is going to turn out to be the best thing that could ever happen to me. And so that's R, right? You focus on in the moment, after the moment. And then third is I, and that's insist on finishing and following through with what you reframed that crucible moment to mean. And when I was researching this after I had thought about it, I had learned that neuroscientists, that study the brain, they found that individuals that had taken on hard and difficult things and they finished hard and difficult things, it left a physical track in their neural pathway. And conversely, individuals that took on hard things, that quit hard things, it left a physical gap in their neural pathway. So what does this mean, like layman's terms? It means that individuals that had consistently taken on the hard things and they finished hard things, they had accumulated all these tracks in the neural pathways to when they're in the moment of a crucible moment or a difficult time, their brain is telling them that they've been through difficult things in the past and they can get through difficult things in the future. Whereas if you've been accumulating all these gaps throughout your entire life, if you're somebody that is always quitting things, you're continuously putting yourself at a disadvantage to achieve these things in life, because your brain is telling yourself that you don't have the capabilities or the ability to get them done. So you can actually rewire your brain through doing hard and difficult things, part of like growing your grit, to finish and follow through on living out what that new reframe is from your crucible moment. And so that's what happens after. And then lastly is T, which is turning your pain into service to others. Because the crucible moment, right, it's going to bring you pain. It could be emotional, physical, mental. Like for me, it was all three. But for a lot of people, right, like if you get laid off from your job, like that's going to be primarily mental and emotional. It might not be physical pain. So for me, I hit all three. And I tell others, like, the crucible moments are going to give you pain. It's just a matter of which one. So like expect the pain. But the real differentiator is like, what do you decide to do with the pain? And when I was at Harvard, I studied under Dr. Arthur Brooks, who's one of the world's leading researchers on happiness, which I had to make sure that that was actually a thing. It's a thing. And he describes that there's three macronutrients to happiness. It's enjoyment, satisfaction, and meaning and purpose. And what I learned, through taking this course and so on and so forth, was that you can fulfill all three of those macronutrients once you turn that pain of your crucible moment and use it to serve somebody else going through a hard and difficult time. You fulfill it because, number one, for enjoyment, right? You enjoy helping somebody else. For satisfaction, it requires something hard and difficult from you, right? You had to open up maybe wounds that you didn't want to. And then lastly, you get that meaning and purpose because now your pain has somebody else to help. So that's the last part of the process. And everybody throughout life is at different stages. Like maybe some people haven't hit too many big crucible moments in life, but like they're coming. And, maybe you just dealt with a crucible moment if you're listening to this. And that's the grit framework in a nutshell.
I think what's fascinating is how, it's built, you built this framework off of, your own experience as well as the work and experience of some very, well-respected thinkers. And what is awesome about it is that, we've got a great example on how it can be effective when we look at the trials that you had to go through to get where you are and the crucible moment. One does not need to have as intense a crucible to apply this framework. And I think that it can be really helpful, not just helping with yourself or helping yourself through a crucible moment, but also helping others. I think that the T is the one that is most powerful for me because, as much as, I respect anyone who is able to overcome obstacles, I think even more highly of those who are able to then reach back and help those who are going through similar trials or are navigating a similar path. So I think that is a really fantastic framework, and it's interesting because it touches on a point you made that, for you, when you were navigating your own crucible, you came back to a simple phrase, find a way, which of course resonated with you, that kind of message to Garcia, figure it out, Lieutenant mindset that Marine officers have. But I also had a wonderful conversation with Colonel Kyle Phillips on the show a few episodes ago. And he talked a lot about the power of language and the power of simple language and the power of mantras, and how being able to repeat those things can leave that imprint on your mind. And so as helpful as it is to think about, your own mantra that you had during your trials, using something like grit can be a great way for people to have a nice little short, easy to remember package to employ whenever they're trying to navigate a struggle or help someone. So we're at time. This has been an incredible conversation. You've given us a fantastic framework, and you've helped us understand, what it can be like to navigate such a tough process. And I think we can all use your example to help ourselves through our own trials. But I close with the same question to all of my guests, and I would love your take on this. So if there were one trait that you would encourage a young aspiring leader to hone or to work on, what would it be?
Resilience. And I want to define it the way that I define resilience. So I define resilience as the interval of time that you allow a bad thing to affect you. So shorter the interval, stronger your resilience. And as a leader, it's imperative, because the shorter the interval that you have to difficult challenges and things that you take on, the shorter that interval is going to be to the people that you lead. So I would answer that with resilience. And it's something that, through that framework and through grit, leadership, is a way to help shorten that interval for not only yourself, your family, but also the people that you lead.
That's a great answer, and it's awesome to hear your definition of resilience. Patrick Nugent, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thanks for dropping knowledge, and we hope to see you again.
Thanks, Bubba.
Thanks so much for listening to Lead with Bubba Scott, brought to you by the VA Lender. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow the show and leave a rating or review wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also follow along on Instagram at Lead with Bubba and let us know your thoughts on the episode. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.